Good morning, everyone. This is our first Sunday of the month, and it's the first Sunday of the year. It is Sunday, January 2nd, 2022. So I was thinking about what to talk about today, and the title of my talk is Crabs, Resolutions, and Dependent Origination. Crabs are in honor of our friend Mark, who raises sand crabs. So it's lovely to see everyone. I wish you all a very, very wonderful year. And gosh, every year nowadays, I say, may it be better than last year. Now it's better than the last 2 years. And oh my gosh, certainly hoping for everyone to have a much better year, but we're still in the thick of it. And certainly in Houston, COVID is raging from what I see. Although from what I hear, it's a bit of a milder version, or people aren't getting quite as sick. But there are a lot of people testing positive, like 5,000 people a day. Yikes. So crabs, resolutions, and dependent origination. So we have a custom in our culture, everyone, to make resolutions this time of the year. And it turns out that understanding change is subtle, profound, and useful. Many people see a problem, they see what's necessary to solve it, they use a certain kind of will and energy and successfully negotiate the issue. And that's a kind of direct approach, and for some people and on some occasions it works. That kind of approach can be associated with a kind of language of willpower, independence, lifting oneself up by one's own bootstraps, cold turkey. Sometimes when people stop using chemicals, they'll talk about cold turkey. But some people can't do that. They just can't decide, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to stop drinking, I'm going to moderate my food, whatever. Some people just can't do that. And there are ways in which modern theorists of change and traditional teachings of Buddhism have much to offer us by way of considering change. And it's a kind of alternative to this sort of sheer willpower model that a lot of people, many of us just assume that, if you're going to change something, you just got to muscle through. One of the reasons I'm giving this talk is because for those of us who can't muscle through, who can't just make an act of willpower, there's actually, both in the tradition and in sort of modern information on change, a lot of helpful information that allows us to more compassionately consider the process of change and more effectively consider the process of change. So metaphorically, the image of a crab comes to mind, who I may really not have this accurate, and I should have consulted with Mark ahead of time, but maybe they approach their target by sort of meandering sideways, this way, that way, this way, that way, rather than just straight on. But for me, the image of a crab is less direct, a little bit more scurrying back and forth around an issue. In the Buddhist context, the way that we can understand the process of change is really in the theory of dependent origination. In Sanskrit, it's pratitya samutpada, but we often say dependent origination. And that has, in a way, two dimensions. It's that things over time change, and that you can look at processes over time. But it also is the understanding that in any given process of change, multiple causes support a particular outcome. It's not just one cause and one outcome. There are many, many multiple causes and conditions that lead to something occurring. You know, in tantric practice, they'll often talk about a dependent origination where you do something, it's a bit like magic, where you do something that symbolically represents something, and that is a dependent origination for something positive or some outcome to occur in the future. You know, so many of us listening to Buddhist teachings, you know, it strikes, I think, many, many Westerners when we hear Buddhist teachings, all these lists, there are always these lists of things. And one of the reasons that there are lists is that the teachings were oral. They weren't written down for centuries. And if you are doing something orally, it's just easier to remember if there's a list. But the other thing is that really a lot of these lists are lists of the causes and conditions that support certain outcomes. So, for example, we just had a sequence of teachings on the perfections, and it culminated in the discussion of the perfection of wisdom, which is our last teaching on a Teaching Tuesday. And wisdom is what's necessary for liberation from the cycles of suffering, cycles of cyclic existence. Wisdom understands the absence of inherent existence, that phenomena are free of kind of durable solidity, that even our sense of self is not really solid, durable, it's not self-existent. All of the senses of our experience, all of our experiences really arise due to causes and conditions, and they're impermanent. They're not durable, they're not sustainable, they're evanescent. So when we hear about wisdom, some people might just want to go for the gusto and I want to develop wisdom and just develop a spiritual pursuit oriented towards wisdom. But that's not how the tradition teaches wisdom. The tradition says, slow down. You want to cultivate wisdom? There are virtues and values and behaviors that contextualize and support and help develop the process of developing wisdom. You need moral behavior to support the development of wisdom. Generosity supports cultivation of wisdom. Patience, energy, concentration, ability to focus, all support wisdom, and vice versa. If you're trying to cultivate all of these things, wisdom supports the cultivation of those behaviors and those virtues. There's some very sweet terms in Tibetan that talk about kind of mutual interdependence, that things depend on one another. So even when we're thinking about wisdom, we're thinking about virtues and values that support it, and the virtues and values are supported in turn by wisdom. It's a kind of different way of thinking. It really is, it is a kind of ecological way of thinking before we knew about ecology in the West, for sure. It's an understanding of sort of the ecology of change. I've been reviewing some teachings in preparation for the teachings that Lama Tenzin Sambel will give at the end of January, which I encourage everyone to attend. They are open to everyone, and there will be amazing teachings on Dzogchen. But I was just seeing how there's a presentation of, an orientation towards our intention, a compassionate intention. There's mention of prior teachers. There's a recollection of history of the teachers and an orientation towards opening our heart towards faith and open-heartedness. There's always a kind of recollection of Buddha, the teachings and the community. And sometimes we think that, oh, those are just kind of necessary things we have to go through before we get to the teachings. But they're all causes and conditions to create an environment where a certain kind of learning can occur. And it's very, very intentional, and it's very, very helpful. So it's really, really quite important to think about at any point in the year, at any point in our lives, if we're considering change, to think about it very, very carefully. And so, of course, as we go on teaching and practicing together, we will always be talking about the causes and conditions that support our practice. But I thought I'd also share some information that's completely consonant with the traditional orientation, but it does come from the modern psychological context. So it's broader in understanding, and it's can be applied to any kind of change that you might be envisioning making. And I've talked about this before for many, many years, and just will recommend again, if anybody is contemplating doing something different in their life, I recommend this book called Changing for Good by James Prochaska. It's very, very easy to read, and it's very, very common sense, but it's also amazingly useful. And what Prochaska did was he knew that all of these psychotherapies were kind of political parties, and every form of psychotherapy touts their own kind of flag and their own methodology. And he said, screw all that. I just want to figure out what works. What do people do when they actually stop smoking, or they stop, or they lose weight, or they stop drinking? What's the actual process? And he's kind of a statistician, and he just really went into the weeds to look at what are the processes of change. And part of what he discovered was that there are stages, which is quite interesting, and that for each stage there are certain kinds of assistance, certain causes and conditions that can support our process of change. I'm not going to do a whole presentation on what he has to say, but thank you, Julia, for posting that. But it's important to understand, and especially when you're thinking about other people who you think could benefit from change, there's a whole stage of change that he talks about, which is called pre-contemplation, which means you're not even thinking about stopping smoking. And, one of the things that he very, very wisely realized was that, there are all these attempts in public health to do certain things. Well, depending on where you're at, you need different messages. And, if you're trying to get a friend to come with you to go to a meditation on a Sunday morning, that's a different message. If they've never thought about meditation, it's a kind of a different message than a person who's been meditating for 20 years, and they need to hear something different. It may be obvious, but it really is helpful to recognize that To get somebody to begin to think about something is really different than to get somebody who's already been thinking about it a lot to move forward. So I'm just going to share some of the things that he points out that are useful. And it's just, again, it's just to understand and appreciate for any process of change. This is probably, these are pieces of things that at certain points are really, really valuable, and at other points it can be less significant. There's information. You want to change something in your life, gather the information. What's the latest thought about exercise? What's the latest thought about losing weight? There's a lot of information out there on losing weight. You want to start meditating, what's the latest information on meditation? What are the types of meditation? What are the varieties of meditation? They talk about Sutra, Tantra, and Dzogchen. What are these different forms of practice? Learn, read. And then there's the emotional engagement with the process. I think that as a therapist and as a Buddhist teacher, in our culture, clearly not enough attention is paid to the emotional issues associated with change. I want to sit and meditate for 20 minutes. How is my pet going to react? How is my daughter going to react? How is my partner going to react? What does it mean to our relationship if I want to sit and meditate for 20 minutes? What does it mean to me to stop doing my normal behavior for 20 minutes and sitting down? What emotionally does that mean about me? And what emotionally do I need in order to do that? What is it like to give up looking at the phone for 20 minutes? For us nowadays, unbelievable, this media thing. Ann and I just been doing retreats, and I think really the biggest thing really is unplugging the phone, email. Whoa. And because of everything we're involved with, we had to leave one little pipe open. we couldn't say goodbye to the world. But it's a big deal. So the emotional engagement with the process, there's commitment. One does at a certain point need to make a commitment. But it's just a piece of it. There's changing habits. Really, really thinking about giving something up and taking something on. And there may be a number of supportive habits that, can be helpful in changing behavior. You may need to turn the TV off or turn the computer off if you want to be meditating. Choosing one's environment carefully, both social and physical. Different people are going to respond to things differently, but you want to meditate, maybe it would be important for you to have a particular spot that is oriented towards meditation. So when you go there, there's an association with meditation. Occasionally nowadays, I'm a therapist and somebody, for whatever reason, we want to do therapy and they end up in a coffee shop with a phone, with a Zoom line to do therapy. It's really not possible. It's just, you need to feel safe and secure to do therapy. And you can't be in the middle of a Starbucks with 40 people around you doing therapy. But sometimes people don't even consider that there's an environment that supports. And then there are helping relationships. This is really what Sangha is all about. It's in our kind of autonomy-oriented culture, yes, people may feel comfortable looking for a book, but it's really hard for people to say, I want help. How did you do that? What worked for you? It's really, really important to appreciate that people have information, they have experience, they are emotionally supportive. So many of us think we should do everything alone. And, it's interesting, the models of Buddhist practice, a lot of practice is done alone. But traditional culture was so supportive and so embedded. I think people really, really felt connected, even if they were sitting a cave high in the mountains. But most of us, even when we're sitting in a group of people, we feel isolated. And so the ability to feel connected and to feel support can really, really be useful in engaging in a change process. One of the things, I was just reviewing some of Prochaska's writing, and one of the things that turns out is that in the early stage of a change process, what really needs to be taking some precedence in your contemplation is, what are all the positives associated with moving forward? Why will it help me to meditate? What's good about meditation? Why should I be thinking about it? But when the actual moment of change is upon us, when we're actually going to make the commitment and actually do something different, the environment that you need to be contemplating is dealing with all the downsides of making the change and the resistances to change. And there's some beautiful stuff in Prochaska's work about really doing the risk-benefit analysis of, changing my behavior. Eating 5 donuts for breakfast is so soothing. The sugar is so tasty. It just feels so comforting to eat those donuts. I'll miss them if I give them up. And this is what you really have to face when you finally, you may have decided, well, I've really got to lose 10 pounds and it's really going to help me and I'll feel lighter and I'll feel more energetic. But golly gee, there's that pain of giving up those yummy donuts in the morning. Whatever it is for us, or, the 5 beers with the buddies. I have this great relationship with my drinking friends. Or I just find looking at the phone so absorbing. I just get lost. And if I'm honest, I'm in a neutral zone. It's as if I took, a mild tranquilizer. I'm feeling nothing. The opium of the masses today is the media. I mean, I actually, when I'm on a plane, of course, which hasn't happened for a long time now, it's night, and they've got those TV screens on, and you walk down the aisle to go to the bathroom, and everybody's just, and it's like, this is crowd control. Everybody's got this intravenous drip, which is called a TV screen, and they're all behaving, and they're all quiet, and they're all in a zone. And it's quite amazing as the power of media to just dull us out. So the process of change probably for most of us will involve something nowadays with changing our involvement with media. So it's just to say change is a very delicate process, whether it's spiritual change, psychological change, behavioral change. We at Dawn Mountain, of course, want to support everybody's spiritual change. We like to offer information, instruction, social support. We encourage students to support fellow students. We see the benefit of practicing together, coming together like we are now. Zoom is our new Sangha. It's got downsides for sure, definite downsides. But we have somebody from the Netherlands on this morning. Isn't that like fabulous? I mean, it's great. The world shrinks, and we're all over the United States, Canada. I see West Coast. I see East Coast. Olympia, Valley Stream, Albuquerque, a lot of Houston, of course, Santa Fe. It's wonderful. We want to support people. So, I encourage everyone at the beginning of the year, think about your resolutions, but do so in a self-friendly way that can optimize your changes for success. Understand all the causes and conditions. Really support your process. Be a friend to yourself and allow other friends to help you. I don't know, got a minute or two. If somebody wants to say something, I'd be happy to hear from you. Your question, comment.
I have a question, Harvey.
Yeah, who's speaking?
Jennifer.
Hey, Jennifer.
Hey. So I've been thinking about resilience a lot, and
yes.
Your statement on how media is the opium of the masses kind of hit or rang true for me. My question to you is, it seems that the work that we do in our spiritual practice is to, in a very friendly way, confront those things that make us uncomfortable or the things that challenges us, like when you were talking about shame. And have you seen this tendency towards turning towards the media having an effect on our ability to be resilient and maybe makes that process of spiritual exploration more challenging?
I don't know that I have an immediate answer to that, but I think it's a useful something to just keep in our eyes open to, is to just see how that affects us. I think just as a kind of cognitive observation, we all run very, very busy, but most of the busy, one of my reigning heroes is Stephen Covey and his 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And in there, he's got this quadrant, and one of the quadrants is both insignificant but amazingly time consuming. And I think most of our busyness is absorbed in really not significant but very, very time consuming. And I think people don't actually proactively reflect on the allotment of their time and their energy, and we don't actually appreciate how much of our good energy is going into just looking at the latest news feed in our phone, using up time that might otherwise go to something more immediate, more experiential, more alive. So, I think you're asking a really important question, but I think it's worthy of a lot of consideration for each individual. How are we dulling ourselves? Because, one of the real big words I think in practice is fresh and freshness. And I think one of the real effects of modern life on many of us is dulling. So I appreciate that question. So I think we're very, very close to shifting over to teaching meditation. I don't know if we have to do something electronically.
We
Emily?
need a short break so I can change the YouTube.
All right, so we'll take a short break and then we'll just lead into meditation. It's lovely to see everybody. Yay.
And then Harvey, can you double